his career, radio and all sorts of other things on the All Talk podcast right now. But right now on LBC, we are going to be talking to Florence Eshalomi, Labour MP for Vauxhall, PPS to Angela Rayner, Matt Vickers, Conservative MP for Stockton South, Sarah Sands, Chair of the independent think tank Bright Blue, and Christine Jardine, Liberal Democrat MP for Edinburgh West and the party's Treasury spokesperson. 0345 6060 973 if you want to get on Cross Question.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock. The Prime Minister has told his ministers to go faster in delivering ideas to help with the rising cost of living. They were advised to be creative in coming up with ways to fix the problem without requiring fresh funding from the Treasury. Boris Johnson says Russia's invasion of Ukraine has opened a new chapter in post-Cold War history after the UK agreed defence pacts with Sweden and Finland. The Finnish Prime Minister, Sanna Marin, says they're seriously considering NATO membership.
If Finland makes this historical step, it is for the security of our own citizens. Joining NATO would strengthen the whole international community that stands for our common values.
Two police officers, jailed for taking pictures of two murdered sisters at a crime scene they were protecting, have lost their appeals to have their sentences reduced. Denise Jaffa and Jamie Lewis both received 2 years and 9 months in December after pleading guilty to misconduct in a public office. The disappearance of a 15-year-old girl from Bristol is now being treated as child abduction. Madison Thomas, who's known as Maddie, has not been seen in 15 days since leaving her foster parents' address in the Southmead area of the city when she said she was going to the shops. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 104 points at 73.47. The pound buys $1.24 and €1.17. LBC weather, early evening rain in the southeast will soon clear. Showers in the northwest, dry elsewhere with a low of 6 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Lottie Morley.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 2 minutes past 8 on LBC. Welcome to Cross Question. Joining me on the panel for the next hour, Florence Eshalomi, Labour MP for Vauxhall, PPS to Angela Rayner. That must be a very challenging position. We'll ask her about that in a moment. She's smiling. Matt Vickers is Conservative MP for Stockton South. Sarah Sands is Chair of the independent think tank Bright Blue, former editor of the London Evening Standard and the Today programme. And Christine Jardine is Liberal Democrat MP for Edinburgh West and is the party's Treasury spokesperson. The number to call if you'd like to ask our panel a question is 0345 6060 973. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. Let's go to our first caller. It's Ulf in Hamburg. Hello, Ulf.
Good evening. My question, why should the EU trust that the UK will help in the protection of the single market?
Sarah Sands.
Well, there's no reason you should particularly trust the UK, except perhaps that there's a common interest and it's a time to be practical on this. And I know that there's a lot of ill feeling, and that the argument of the EU would be that if you don't stick to the agreement that you made, then why should we trust you on the rest? But I think we just need to find a way through this. And I think that if talks with the US and perhaps some partners who don't feel that they're so sort of bound up in this relationship, we just need to find a way through it, because otherwise it's disastrous.
Why do you think they haven't found a way through it so far? Because the EU blames Britain for being intransigent. Britain's blaming the EU for being intransigent. Now that they both might be intransigent, I don't know. It's very difficult to sort the wood from the trees on this.
It is on both sides, but I think if they genuinely care about this Good Friday Agreement and some sort of workable solution, I think both of them need to move in some way. I think actually Liz Truss did genuinely want a negotiation. She did ask for that, didn't she? But I would think fault absolutely on both sides.
Christine Jardine.
What worries me about it is that I feel that the government is now playing politics with Northern Ireland, and they're playing politics with
the EU isn't?
Well, I'm concerned about what our government is doing, and I think they need to take a different approach. And I think if they try and ride roughshod over the Northern Ireland Protocol, not only will they be breaking international law, but they'll be plunging us into a trade war with our nearest neighbours. And the people who are going to suffer through that are the people of Northern Ireland and the farmers throughout the UK who are already seeing their incomes cut by 50%. Now, they need to start thinking about this seriously. Now, this is not a problem which has come up overnight. This is something that people warned about in 2016, that the danger in leaving the European Union was that it would cause problems, it would threaten the Good Friday Agreement. Here we are 6 years later, and they're still arguing about it. And I worry because the implications of not getting this right and not allowing the elected representatives in Northern Ireland to get on with dealing with the same problems as the rest of us want dealt with, basically dealing with the cost of living crisis, looking after the farmers, looking after the trade, ensuring that they can get products there from the rest of the United Kingdom. That's what we have to focus on, and that's what we have to get done, and stop playing games with the Union and with the future of the people in Northern Ireland.
Is that what you think the DUP are doing? Playing with the future of the Union by not nominating a Deputy First Minister and saying we won't do that until the protocol is sorted?
Yeah, I think there's far too much posturing, there's far too much game playing. They need to find a solution. And as I've said, I worry about the long-term implications for all of us, but I worry about the people whose incomes are threatened by this, the people who are trying to deal with the cost of living crisis, the threat to the agricultural industry. And we really need to get to grips, and the government needs to stop trying to call the EU's bluff, and the EU needs to stop trying to call our bluff and just get round the table and get a solution.
Why can't we all just get along?
Do you know? Well, it's interesting. Theresa May did say yesterday that she had a solution, and if only they would just stop playing games.
Yeah, why didn't you support that? Do you regret it?
I think there's no point in looking back at where we've been. What we have now is a problem that we have to solve.
But do you regret it?
No. Because it was part of.
So you helped us get into this position, then, didn't you? Because if you and many in the Labour Party had supported Theresa May's deal, we wouldn't be in this position
now. If the
now.
Conservatives had been prepared to compromise at that time, then
she was compromising. That was the point.
Wouldn't compromise. But like I said, Iain, we're not going to fix that now.
Okay.
We could have fixed it by, we could go right back to 2016 and we could have fixed it.
Well, it's quite convenient to take that position, isn't it? But looking back, if the Labour Party had combined with many Conservatives, you would have got Theresa May's deal through. It's as simple as that. And you must look back and regret that.
That's not where we are now.
No, I know it isn't, but it was where we were then, and you made a false call.
What I regret more than anything else is that our government is playing games with our future, with the future of the United Kingdom and the future of the people in Northern Ireland. That's the bottom line in this, and that's what we can't get away from.
Matt Vickers, that is a fair comment, isn't it? That politicians are playing politics in Northern Ireland, and it's an incendiary place to do that, and the consequences of this could be catastrophic.
I think the nature of a negotiation like this, I think anybody looking at it would be stupid to assume it wasn't going to go down to the wire, there wasn't going to be some chest beating, we weren't going to have a game of who blinks first, because that's what happened in the original negotiations. That's what's happened again now. I think
we blinked first, didn't we? That was the problem.
Well, I think the problem actually is we entered into this agreement based on goodwill. That goodwill, it wasn't manifest.
We know that's not the case because Lord Frost, David Frost, who was the chief negotiator for us, has admitted that they just signed it to get Brexit done. That's where this has all stemmed from.
The reality is we kind of are where we are, but goodwill on their part.
So you agree with Christine on that?
I would talk about life-saving vaccines being blocked by the EU. As that is not a relationship that is based on goodwill. And I think the top and bottom of it is we need to get around the table and resolve the issue.
But when you look at the fact that in the elections on Thursday, a majority of AMs elected to Stormont support the Northern Ireland Protocol, and then you have the DUP saying, well, we don't care about that, we're not going to nominate a First Minister until you sort it out, Boris Johnson. Well, it's not within his gift to sort it out in the sense that the EU have to agree to whatever he's proposing, and they're clearly not going to do that.
Well, I think, do you know what? The DUP are making their voice heard about a situation that is entirely unacceptable to them and entirely unacceptable to the people of Northern Ireland. And I don't think that message is just for Boris.
That is simply not true. When you, as I said, the majority of AMs support the Northern Ireland Protocol. There was a report out today that we heard from Neil Richmond, an Irish Member of Parliament, which says that the Northern Ireland economy is booming like never before. It's outperforming the rest of the UK. So what's not to like? And a lot of business in Northern Ireland supports the protocol.
It's deemed unacceptable by
some.
But I would
not
say
a
the
majority.
electorate spoke on that, and I think that...
Well, the electorate did speak on that. What part of that don't you get?
Well, I completely disagree with it. I think the electorate spoke, put Sinn Féin in power. The reason that occurred was partly because of people's objections to the protocol.
If you add up the votes of Sinn Féin, all the nationalist parties plus the Alliance, they outnumber the votes of the DUP, the UUP and TUV. Is that not the case?
You believe that the protocol is acceptable in its current form?
I'm not giving my opinion.
Yeah, good. I think we agree to disagree.
Well, I don't need you to agree or disagree with me. I'm not offering an opinion. All I'm telling you is that the votes cast in those elections showed that the Northern Ireland people, the majority of them, agreed with parties that support the protocol. That is not an opinion, that's a fact.
That is a perspective and an interpretation of that result. I think it is entirely unacceptable to the people of Northern Ireland.
Well, I mean, you're calling black white there, aren't you? Florence, let's come to you. What do you think the way forward is here? And in direct answer to Ulf's question, why should the EU believe that they can trust the UK with respect to the single market?
I was in the chamber yesterday when the former Prime Minister made her comments on the Queen's speech, and it was almost silence when she recalled the fact that the agreement she put forward, they didn't have majority support. Obviously, I wasn't an MP at the time.
Not my fault, guys.
But I will claim for your listeners, and I'm sure my constituency was the largest remaining voting constituency in the whole of the UK.
Would you have supported the deal? The one that Theresa May did, because, as I said to Christine, if MPs had supported it, and there could have been a majority if all Labour MPs, Liberal Democrats, SNP, a minority of Tories had supported it, we wouldn't be having this conversation, would we? We might be having another one, but
I think that agreeing with both Christine and Sarah, I think the main thing is how do we get all parties around the table? Yeah. The ongoing squabbling around this is having a major impact on people. In terms of, there's issues on cost of living, issues in trade. We are now 6 years on. Is it going to take another 6 years before we make any progress in this? And I think the key thing is to hear Tory MPs essentially say this afternoon that deal was signed under duress and it was forced on us. No, it's a case of our Prime Minister needs to take the lead in making sure that we have a deal that's acceptable to everybody. And this isn't a case of, it's about who's calling whose bluff first. I think it's a shame that we're in this position, but ultimately, if I was a parliamentarian in that time, I think, having read some of what Theresa May and the former government put forward, I think it was quite sensible. It's a shame it wasn't supported, but we are where we are. And I think the main thing is how do we move forward?
But there have been lots of negotiations between the EU and this country over the Northern Ireland Protocol over the last 18 months, mainly with David Frost, but now Liz Truss and Brandon Lewis. And they've got precisely nowhere because the European Commissioning negotiating mandate apparently doesn't allow Šefčovič to really come to any agreement. That's the basis of this, I think, in that he's so restricted in what he can agree to that that's part of the reason why they haven't got anywhere. And I wonder whether any of you think there will be some flexibility on the side of the EU to maybe loosen that a little bit, because clearly for some sectors it's not working. I mean, sure, everyone can agree with that. For some sectors it isn't working. So therefore, logic would dictate that if something isn't working, then you try and do something to make it work. And yet, at the moment, that his negotiating mandate doesn't seem to allow him to.
Well, surely that's the skill of the negotiators, to find something which will allow it to open up, to find some way of making it acceptable to whoever you're negotiating with, that they compromise with you. You have to find a compromise. And that is the job of the negotiators. That's the job of the government, not to ride roughshod over international agreements, but to find a way of coming to a compromise and an agreement that can make it work, can make the situation work for the people of Northern Ireland, because they've had 6 years. And as Florence said, they're no further forward. And that's, the danger of getting it wrong, as you said yourself, could be catastrophic.
Ulf, let's go back to you. Help us out here. Give us some advice. What do you think that should happen here? Or do you think the fact that it was an agreement signed by Britain and the EU means that the EU are quite within their rights to say, sorry, you signed this a couple of years ago, we're not shifting?
Well, they're not just within their rights, they actually have no choice. This is about the survival of the EU. If the single market is undermined, the whole project goes the way of the dodo. Which means
if a single British sausage gets into the Republic of Ireland, that threatens the whole of the single market, doesn't it?
No, worse things would happen. There would be probably a large influx of all sorts of stuff we don't want, and I don't think the British authorities would prevent that. I don't trust the British government. Sorry. So we must be sure we are protected. So we need a border. Any border will the DUP will not accept any sort of border that works. So only no border will be accepted by the DUP and their friends. But no border would endanger the European project. So the problem so either you throw the DUP under the bus again, you got formed there, or we'll have a trade war. And have a look at the map. I don't see any other way this can end.
Isn't this sad that we're talking about potentially the trade war with our closest neighbours, with who should be our biggest allies and who were for 40 years, and look where the last 6 years have got us?
Well, Matt, you speak in response to that rather. I was going to give an opinion then, but I'd let you do it.
Well, the debate is about who can trust who. I don't think it's necessarily, he might not trust the British government, but I think we've got our own gripes with the EU. I think the reality is we've got to be big boys, get around the table and resolve the issue one way or the other.
Let the big dog sort it out.
Yeah. It's kind of where we are, isn't it?
Yeah.
The reality is it requires people to sit around the table.
It hasn't worked so far.
We didn't need to be here, is the thing.
We are,
and
as
nothing's
you said.
changed. Is the trouble.
As Theresa May used to say, nothing has changed. Right, Ulf, thank you very much. We'll come to another call in a moment. 0345 6060 973. If you'd like to put a question to our panel. It's 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
It's 90 minutes past 8 on LBC. Answering your questions, if you just tuned in, are Florence Eshalomi, Labour MP for Vauxhall, Matt Vickers, Conservative MP for Stockton South, Sarah Sands, Chair of the think tank Bright Blue, and Christine Jardine, Liberal Democrat MP for Edinburgh West, and the party's Treasury spokesperson. Right, let's go to your next question. It's from Anthony in Blackpool. Hello, Anthony.
Hello, Ian. Lee Anderson commented today that people using food
He's a
banks...
Conservative MP.
Yep. Should be obliged, that people using food banks should be obliged to take cooking lessons, okay? My question, is Britain in the 21st century relapsing to the values of the 19th century workhouse when people were only admitted under sufferance if they submitted to controlling strictures?
Matt Vickers.
I haven't seen him actually ask the question. I haven't seen him the specific wording and what went on there. I have seen the headline of the Mirror, but I tend not to follow what is said in the headline of the Mirror. I think, do you know what? I think there is a discussion to be had about budgeting and helping people who are in a tough time. You know, there's a whole host of reasons that people end up going to a food bank. There's not one fixed reason that people go.
There is to get food.
Well, yes, but they arrive there for very different reasons. Some people might have fell on hard times for very different reasons. Anyway, they get there, and I think, is there a role in supporting people more widely than just giving them food, i.e. helping with budgeting and giving advice and helping with issues with debt, helping people with cooking? Do you know what? I'm a terrible cook. I would probably be able to spend a lot less if I could cook. I don't know the context of the comments exactly, so I wouldn't like to grade them.
Well, I'm going to give you the context of the comments because I've got them here. He claimed generation after generation of people in his constituency, quotes, cannot budget. And there's another quote, there is not this massive use for food banks. Well, there are more people using food banks than ever before, are there not?
I think, do you know what, there's all sorts of reasons. And actually, two things. A, do I think there is a role for wider support of people who are using food banks who might be there with issues with debt, issues with budgeting, issues with cooking. But actually, it's about what we're doing to support those people and help them along the way, whether that be the changes on universal credit to help people keep a bit more of what they earn, whether that be the increase in the living wage that's coming in, that's going to put an extra £1,000 in people's pockets. It's about finding solutions and helping people along the way and understanding that there is more to it than...
And then he said people could cook meals from scratch for 30p a day. Do you not think that comments like that show that many Tory MPs are completely out of touch with the lives of ordinary people?
I would not say for 1 minute that Lee Anderson is not in touch with the lives of ordinary people. He used to be a Labour councillor. He used to work down a mine.
Yeah.
He represents an area that has huge issues with deprivation and poverty. So I would not say that the modern Conservative Party, that you look at those benches who have accents of all shapes and sorts, like mine, and come from my part of the world, I think it is bonkers to suggest that they're not in touch with reality.
Do you think you could cook for 30p a day, even though you can't cook?
Well, here's a good one for you. I went to Lee Anderson's constituency, where he did a ready, steady cook, and he did just that. Helped local youngsters from the local college. We looked at budgeting. We looked at budgeting. We looked at how many meals could be cooked with X, Y, and Z, and we took a local chef who went down, showed us A, how to cook, and B, how we could make that money go a bit further. And it was a really useful thing.
Can I ask,
for me.
was that before or after the energy price hike?
That was before.
Well, you couldn't cook anything.
That is a very good point.
Exactly.
A very good point.
Florence.
I think sometimes...
I thought you were going to be lost for words there for a moment.
In the chamber, when you hear some of the Tory MPs stand up and speak, I do often take a sigh of deep breath because I'm thinking, seriously? In terms of people not knowing how to budget, my mum was a single mum. I'm one of 3 girls. My mum was on what you called income support back then. She had a lifelong disability. She suffered from sickle cell anemia. My mum was one of the best people in terms of budgeting. People on low income are the best people on budgeting because they know how much they've got to live on. They know how to make that extra penny last and stretch. They know how much they are putting on their key meter in terms of topping up their electricity. They know where to go in terms of buying the food, where the discounts are. They know how to cook. They are hoping to use cash instead of tap in, tap out, because that's the way they keep a check on their budget. So to have a Tory MP say that they don't know how to budget, that's an insult. Frankly, it is an insult. And the fact that we are seeing more people using food banks now. Again, I grew up in the household of low income. I had free school meals at both primary and secondary school. During the free school meals debate, hearing Tory MP after Tory MP basically say that parents can't, teach their children, that's why they're on free school meals. I wasn't on free school meals because my mum couldn't teach me. It was because my mum was on a low income. And to have that kind of language and rhetoric coming out is just so degrading, and it's not fair on the people we all seek to represent. What we need to look at is why people are having to use food banks. One of the main reasons is because their income isn't going up. Their benefits have been cut. You try living on universal credit. By the time you've paid for your rent, your travel, topped up your electricity, you just about have enough money to feed yourself. The fact that over 2 million people went without food for one day last monthly, we should be asking our government, why is this happening in modern day Britain in 2022? The fact that in my constituency and across Lambeth, over 22,000 people last year visited the food bank and had food parcels should shame us. These are figures here and now. And to hear a Conservative MP who is responsible, like me and you, setting the legislation, looking at how to help people, dismiss that and say because people don't know how to cook and they don't know how to manage their budget is an insult.
Matt, would you accept that there is a tonal problem here, at least, in that you had George Eustice, the DEFRA Secretary, last week, advising people, well, you can buy own brand rather than sort of the other brands in a supermarket. You had Boris Johnson struggling to answer similar questions with Susanna Reid. Is it really that difficult to come up with things other than saying, well, people need to learn to cook or buy own brands?
I think, do you know what? I don't think it is a bad thing to say that we will try to help people wider than just giving them food at a food bank. We will try to support them in budgeting.
And that's not what food banks do. No. Food banks already, those fantastic volunteers, I should add, working in our food banks up and down the country, already provide debt advice, already provide access to how they can help them in terms of immigration, housing support, already provide nutritional support. They provide all of that already.
Okay, let's hear from Christine and Sarah.
I think that's a positive.
Surely, Matt, the reason that people are forced to turn to food banks is because the government isn't giving them the help they need. That's the problem. The government's coming up with ideas, like Iain said, buy value brands. I have never met a person on low income or who was struggling who didn't already know that and wasn't already doing it. They've run out of ideas on how to help people, and they're not listening to the ideas that the other parties put forward about cutting VAT, about a windfall tax on the energy industry. Put money back in people's pockets. Instead of tax hikes, give them the money to spend, to go out and put, in the local shops. It helps the economy if you've got people spending money. And like Florence, I come from a working class background, and I could not believe what I read Lee Anderson had said, because to me that is just, it's not the picture of people who are struggling. They are not there because they can't cook or they can't budget. They are there because they are not getting the support that they need to get them through a difficult time.
Let me just read you a bit more of what he said. He said there's, quotes, a brilliant scheme at Food Bank in Ashfield in his constituency. He said when people come now for a food parcel, they've got to register for a budgeting course and a cooking course. And what we do at the food bank, we show them how to cook cheap and nutritious meals on a budget. We can make a meal for around 30p a day, and this is cooking from scratch. Now, when you read the whole quote, as opposed to just the 30p a day, I mean, that actually is a good thing, isn't it, when people are being helped in that way?
It would be a good thing if it was offered, but what he says is you have to register. Now, that's making the help, the support that is a last resort for people, conditional on them doing what you think is right. Now, they already know how to cook. They already know how to budget. So what are you going to say to them? You've got to do all this before we help you. As Florence said, they're volunteers. They're there to help and support people who are going through a difficult time. Many of them actually now in the economic situation we're in are people who've never been in that situation before. And, to insult them by saying, we'll teach you how to cook and we'll teach you how to budget, when what they just need is immediate help for their children is insulting.
Sarah?
Well, the question was about the rhetoric, and I agree, and I think Florence was very, very powerful in the way that she put it, and it just sounds ugly, actually, to have that lack of compassion And I think it is a real problem. We see, particularly with cost of living, we saw it through the pandemic, that there is a growing inequality. And I think it's all right, the Conservatives talking about levelling up, but you actually have to you just have to have a sort of language of compassion. And I think that's what was lacking here.
And that is right, isn't it, Matt? It's the language here. I mean, maybe people should think, OK, what would David Cameron say here? Because obviously he came from a privileged background, but he always seemed to be able to relate to people in a way that maybe some of your colleagues are struggling with at the moment, to put it mildly.
Two things. I have fantastic voluntary organisations in my part of the world, and I think that many of the people who go there, in fact, having talked to many of the people, there is value in the support with budgeting, with debt advice, with cooking. It's actually useful to them and helpful. So I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's a good thing, and it's something that should be part of the offer to support people who are in the most need. But going back to the approach of cutting VAT, actually, we would be cutting VAT for millionaires. Everybody would benefit. What we need to do is targeted support, which is exactly what the government's doing, changing that UC taper rate so those on the lowest incomes will have an extra £1,000 in their pocket, increasing the living wage. We've got the 150
but Christine, you always say it's not enough, but you're never quite clear on, OK, well, this is exactly what we would do and this is what it would cost.
But we have been clear. We've said we would cut VAT across the board from 20 to 17.5%.
Matt's just explained why that may not be such a good idea, because it would actually help rich people too.
We should put money back into people's pockets who need it. It would be £600 we could give families.
There's a debate about that.
Give the £20 uplift on universal credit back. That would actually target people who really would need it.
As well. I also agree with targeting warmer homes help and helping pensioners who've been caught out by this government abandoning the triple lock, which they promised they wouldn't. And pensioners now find themselves way behind inflation, falling behind, when the triple lock was designed to keep them up with inflation. So you need a package of measures, and one of them has to be cutting VAT. Now, it worked in 2008 when Gordon Brown cut VAT. We should be doing it again. Okay. We should be looking at what we can do immediately. We need immediate measures.
That was to revive the economy generally, wasn't it? It wasn't targeted at poor people.
But the economy's not in the best state it's ever been in, regardless of what Boris Johnson might say. The economy is not in a good state, so it needs help as well. And what we've got, instead of the government helping people, is, hiking the national insurance payments, stealth taxes, changing thresholds. What we need is help now, immediate help for the people who need it.
Cutting VAT would help the millionaire with a 10-bedroom house to heat his pool. The cutting VAT is...
That's enough about Rishi Sunak. Gratuitous, really, that was, wasn't it? But there we go. Right, we'll take more of your calls. Anthony, thank you very much for that. Very good question. It's 8:31 on LBC. Time for the news headlines with Lottie Morley.
The Prime Minister has told his ministers to think of a way to fix the energy crisis without asking for more money from the Treasury. Boris Johnson has pushed the idea of lowering bills of people who live near wind farms. Elsewhere, Mr Johnson says the UK's new security agreements with Sweden and Finland come at a pivotal moment for both Nordic countries. The war in Ukraine has pushed them to the verge of applying for NATO membership, a move that Russia has condemned. And 2 men have been left with potentially life-threatening injuries after scaffolding collapsed in West London. Emergency services are at Hammersmith Town Hall this evening, and the pair have been taken to hospital. LBC weather: early evening rain in the southeast, will clear soon. Showers in the northwest. Dry elsewhere with a low of 6 degrees.
This is LBC.
Where
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 8:34. If you haven't been listening to the last half an hour, you've missed an absolute treat with our panel: Christine Jardine, Liberal Democrat MP, Sarah Sands from the think tank Bright Blue, Matt Vickers, Conservative MP, and Florence Eshalomi, Labour MP. Lots of calls coming in. We could do with some more, though. 0345 6060 973. Ben is in Clacton. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Ian. And good evening, panel. The question is, what does the panel think about the Boris Johnson agreeing with Finland and Sweden to come to their aid if they're attacked when they're not in NATO?
So Boris Johnson has been in Helsinki and I presume Stockholm today, talking to the Finnish Prime Minister and the Swedish Prime Minister. They've announced security pacts between Britain and those two countries. And obviously both of those countries are more than considering joining NATO. They're likely to apply to join very, very soon. Florence, how significant do you think this visit has been?
I think there's still a lot we need to look at in terms of the details in the agreement. I think it's good that both Sweden and Finland are thinking about joining NATO. I think the more we see European countries condemning what's happening in Russia, the better. Calling out an invasion on another state and being unified in that. Again, I think it's so good to see all parties in Parliament coming together unified on that act. But equally, I'd be careful in terms of anything our Prime Minister's currently agreeing. We earlier we spoke about, the issue going on in Northern Ireland, the fact that we still haven't had an agreement. So I think, proceed with caution if you're having our Prime Minister ask you to sign up to anything. But equally...
is that really the sort of thing to say about a Prime Minister who's actually performed rather well in Ukraine?
He has, credit where credit's due. I think the Prime Minister's leadership, with support from all parties in Parliament on this, really disgraceful act by Russia, is something we will look back on in many years to say this is Parliament at its finest. And again, like both Christine and Matt, I was in the chamber to listen to President Zelensky, and I think, but equally going forward, there are still live threats from Russia. The fact that other countries are thinking, what could be Russia's next step, wanting to be part of that military operation, military defence on that is again something we need to look at. I think we should look at the details in the agreement, but it's positive steps.
I mean, Ben's point is that it might be premature to come to agreements like this. I mean, I'm assuming what he means by that is sort of prodding the Russian bear a bit.
I disagree with that. I think what the Russian invasion has shown, not just countries in Europe, but right across the world, is that we cannot all sit back and allow dictators to do as they please and think that in this day and age you were going to invade a sovereign country. So all countries are looking at what would they do, how can they help support. And I think, for Sweden and Finland to be thinking about joining NATO is a good thing, and it's something that we in the UK should welcome.
And Sarah Sands, if Russia hadn't invaded, this debate wouldn't be going on in those countries, would it? So the Russians have sort of kicked themselves in the foot in that regard. But Putin has said that if Finland and Sweden do join NATO, there would be consequences. I mean, should that send a shiver down our spine?
Well, it certainly should, and we know the talk of nuclear escalation and so on has become now slightly too familiar. And so while I think it's absolutely right that we show military solidarity with Sweden and Finland, and this really is about democracy and hoping to show Russia just how isolated it is, I still think the language is pretty alarming, and we know, as you say, that poor Ukraine trying to join NATO, or the talk of Ukraine joining NATO, Russia still uses as a reason for the beginning of all this. So it's somehow showing absolute strength and solidarity, but just without a kind of recklessness, because I think that we could all just talk ourselves into something absolutely terrifying.
Matt Vickers.
I think across the country, people can be very proud of the part that Britain's playing in this. The UK is batting well above its weight, whether it be humanitarian aid, whether it be lethal aid, whether it actually be convening people, and that's what's been so powerful.
Let's not mention refugees.
Well, do you know what? We've got a scheme set up to support people in a way huge. There's people turning up in Stockton now to get support, and I think it's a really good thing that we're offering that financial support to do that. But actually, the entire thing, the reason that the response has been so successful is because we've done it in lockstep with countries that, well, we wouldn't have thought we'd have got such a broad coalition internationally as we've got, and anything we can do to strengthen that, to show that solidarity, to show Russia how isolated it is and how wrong it is, has got to be a good thing. The line in the sand, they've already crept over the line in the sand, and we're putting some more lines in there, and they'll be going back.
Christine?
I think the agreement that the Prime Minister has signed, I think we should support it and welcome it, because we're in a situation where we need our allies to work together. We have seen what has happened in Ukraine, and we cannot allow any suggestion to get out there that we would allow Putin to take this aggression further and threaten the other countries around Russia. We know that Ukraine's desire to join NATO was instrumental in taking action. It's not just his excuse. He did it because of that. And I think if Finland and Sweden want to join NATO, that is a good thing, and that we should be working with our allies. We should be working towards mutual protection and ensuring that none of us, in terms of none of our countries, feel alone against the potential threat of a Russian invasion, which we have seen in Ukraine is a very real potential if Putin thinks that country is weak and not protected and not part of NATO. So I think the Prime Minister, I think he has done the right thing, and I think this is an agreement that we should support.
Great stuff. Ben, thank you very much. Let's take a text from Diane in Carlisle. Should there be an emergency budget to deal with the cost of living? Matt Vickers.
You know what, this branding of an emergency budget, I think during the pandemic, we saw announcements every day for months and months and months, and we responded to the circumstances as they occurred. I think that's what the government's continuing to do, and I think they'll be looking at every package and every opportunity to support people with the means that we have available to us.
Do you think they've done enough then?
I think, do you know what, the one thing that we've all got to remember is that there is no such thing as government money, it's taxpayers' money, and what we take, it's got to come from somewhere. And actually, I think the right approach is what we're doing in focusing that support on those on the lowest incomes, those who need it most, rather than the VAT cut that'll help the 10-bedroom mansion heat his swimming pool. He'll get a lot more from the VAT cut.
You're obsessed with Rishi Sunak.
He'll get more from the VAT cut than the single mum in a small house who uses a much less energy. Actually, put that in the mix. We are supporting people. You've got the change in national insurance threshold, £330 in people's pockets. 70% of people are going to get a tax cut out of that.
But that's barely touching the sides in the circumstances that we're in, is it?
Yeah, so let's talk about universal credit taper rate, £1,000. Increase in living wage, £1,000. £330 from the change in national insurance thresholds, and that's before we talk about the £150, before we talk about the money that we've given to local councils to support those who were most in need.
My local authority is still waiting for the money.
Yeah, you're lending us our own money.
Exactly.
You're lending us our own. You said yourself, it's taxpayers' money, it's our money, and you're lending it back to people in the hope that the energy prices will come down. You're gambling with taxpayers' money when it comes to that. Now, an emergency budget, you're talking about taking, giving to the people who need it and taking from the people who've got more. Well, a windfall tax on the energy companies and the massive tech companies that have made a fortune through the pandemic, and now the energy price increase would make a massive difference to families in this country, make a huge difference to their day-to-day lives and how they're able to cope with the cost of living crisis. Plus, Rishi Sunak's got a £40 billion bonus coming from increased taxes and VAT. Why is that not going back to the people in the country who need it most? You can give us list upon list of what the government has done for the past 2 years, and I applauded the furlough scheme. It had massive flaws, and you abandoned, it to,
excluded
the fraud.
UK.
Excluded UK. 3 million people that the government denied didn't exist, that everybody was getting it. When, it wasn't perfect. And now we're in a situation where people are having to decide whether to feed their kids or heat their homes. Pensioners who lost out through having been denied the triple lock this year are having to take to buses to keep warm during the day because that's cheaper than heating their homes.
I've never been on a bus that was warm, I have to say.
Well,
but here we are.
But it needs
and I do
more.
go on buses.
It needs more than what the government is doing.
Sarah, in the 1970s, Denis Healey, when he was Chancellor, had successive emergency budgets and caught a political cold from it because people thought, well, if you have an emergency budget, clearly you haven't planned, you're incompetent. Do you think that's the reason why the Conservatives are reluctant to maybe go down that route?
Yes, it may be. I don't know if they are moving on the windfall tax.
I think they are.
As if
Rishi
it's
Sunak
sort of
certainly
softening,
seems to
doesn't
be,
it, on that? So I think if you just have to have something to say in the emergency budget. And I think that there's a sort of nervousness. Of course, one has to pay attention to those who are really suffering, but one also wants a sense that this is an economy that could be on the up, and so I think if you need to also have some sort of statements about where the potential is, where employment can come from and so on, because I guess for conservatism, if it's just all about having to wrap your arms around everyone, it's starting to feel like a very, very sort of big state. I think these are desperate circumstances for some people, and the cost of living is sort of clear, but you just want another message that there is some economic hope as well, I think.
Florence?
We're talking about the cost of living, but when we look at some of the hardships, some of the choices that some people are having to make right now, it's gone past cost of living. It's about the cost of surviving. People are trying to survive. People are trying to look at how to heat their home. People are trying to look at how to put petrol in the car if they drive. Some people still rely on their car for work. People are looking at how to feed themselves and having to make that choice. And when we are seeing some of the energy companies essentially saying we have made this profit and actually we feel that we can give some of it back, it's incumbent on our government to listen and say, well, what more could we do? And Matt talks about taxpayers' money. By going for that windfall tax, it's not taxpayers' money, it's profit. Profit they have made over and above their regular income. Profit that this one-off windfall tax, they would not feel it because it's a one-off tax. But that one-off tax would help so many people here and now. Based on our calculations, that one-off windfall tax would bring in around £2 billion, which would help around 9 million people with £600, which would go towards their energy costs here and now. And my worry is that we're talking about some of the issues people are facing here and now. This is going to get worse. This is only the beginning. We are going to see more people fall into destitute. We are going to see more people having nowhere to squeeze, nowhere to turn. We are seeing people who normally have that disposable income now thinking twice about going out. So this whole issue around the economy needs to recover. My constituency, the South Bank, buzzing. We normally have 30,000 people coming through, 300 million people come through Waterloo Station on an annual basis. Those figures are not there yet. That VAT cut would have helped so many of those organisations along the South Bank and across constituencies. The government needs to face the reality and look at how they can help people now, not in the future, because it's going to get worse.
And we're going to hear all about what it's like being PPS to Angela Rayner in just a moment. That's called a tease. It's 8:47.
LBC. Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Michael Gove, Secretary of State for Levelling Up. Do you think we need an emergency budget?
I don't think we need an emergency budget. I do think that we need to make sure that we have the right balance.
If we don't have some kind of budget or some kind of announcement from your colleague, Mr. Sunak, how is that to be brought about?
Well, we've already done things like cutting council tax for the very poorest, helping with energy bills for everyone. We are also looking at other steps that we can take to help
Mr.
everyone.
Gove, scrapping MOTs is not exactly going to get it done, is it?
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC.
There's
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 10 to 9 on LBC. So, Florence, what is it like being PPS? Just explain what PPS is to Angela Rayner.
PPS, Parliamentary Private Secretary, to Angela Rayner, our fab Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. And it's great working with Angela. There's a different side to Angela that sometimes people don't see, someone who cares deeply in terms of how we can, as the Labour Party, help people who need our help, how we as the Labour Party can look at why it is we lost. She's working in looking at our next
But what do you do?
Candidates. What do I do? Making sure she gets to places on time. When she's subbing for Keir at Prime Minister's Question Time, the prep for that's quite good. She's got a shadow cabinet brief as well, shadow cabinet, so obviously we prepare for questions normally on Thursdays. Opposite Steve Barclay, so that's quite fun. And in her role as deputy party leader as well, to work with the party and the party structure. But it's fun working with Angela. She's someone I admire, someone who, like me, comes from a humble background, and I look at some of the stick that she gets and some of the stick in general that women, from to be fair, all political parties get.
Well, she got a lot of stick last week for doing a bake-off with me and Sajid Javid, saying, there are people seriously on Twitter saying, how dare you mix with a Tory cabinet minister, as if. Right, let's move on and take a text question from Bushra in Sevenoaks. A veteran Palestinian-American correspondent for Al Jazeera has been killed while covering a raid by Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank. Is this a war crime? Christine.
I used to be a journalist, and whenever I hear about a journalist hurt or killed in a conflict, I feel for their families, as I do for anyone in those circumstances. I don't know enough, and I don't think anybody knows enough yet about the particular circumstances of what happened. But obviously something has gone terribly wrong because she was wearing a flak jacket and marched with press. Something has gone wrong. Each side is blaming the other, and it's yet another death in the continuing tension between Israel and Palestine that we really do need at some point to focus our attention on and find a solution. But I don't think we know enough yet about what actually happened.
Sarah?
Yes, I'd agree. And we've seen journalists in war zones, obviously journalists reporting in Ukraine and so on. And so when you hear the flak jacket, the words press, it just must have some special status. And so whatever happened, if we could just think of the role that journalists have.
In your role as editor, have you had to send people into war zones, send journalists into war zones?
Yes, and you have a duty of care, and so when you hear about something like this, it just makes your stomach turn.
I was interviewing Nick Robinson this morning for my All Talk podcast, and we spent a long time talking about his time in Ukraine right at the beginning of the war, and the measures that the BBC had to take to protect not just him, but the camera people, the sound people, and they have security people. And it's quite something, because I remember when it all first started, there was a part of me that I wanted to go, but then I thought, well, I haven't been on one of these conflict courses. I wouldn't know what to do. I'd be a liability in so many ways anyway. Florence?
Yeah, no, again, just to agree with Christine in terms of the exact details of what happened, but what we must all agree with is the fact that we need journalists covering some of these horrific incidents in terms of reporting accurately. It's about how we protect freedom of the press to be able to report back to us. And I think, commending journalists and press and all the people behind the scenes, behind the camera, who are in essence risking their lives to bring us real-time live news on war zones. But I think, it's really tragic what's happened, and I'm hoping that there will be an investigation and especially for her family and her loved ones to look at, what happened in this, tragic situation.
Okay, Matt?
I think, I don't know the details and the ins and outs to cast a specific, but I think it just puts in context the risk that journalists put themselves in to bring us the news, to hold people to account, to deliver scrutiny, and actually, because of the 24-hour news world that we're in, we see footage we would never have seen. We see it up close and a standard, well, we expect it now to a standard we never would have ever dreamt we could have it, to see this stuff live. as it happens, and somebody puts their lives on the line to do that, and we should be very grateful to them.
Bushra, thank you very much for that question. Let's go to Lloyd in Neasden. Hello, Lloyd.
Hi, Ian. How you doing?
Very well. What would you like to ask?
I'd like to ask, when are politicians or people in the public eye just going to stand up and admit they made a mistake? I've heard you ask two of your panellists with proof and evidence about their opinions or about a fact, and they both denied it. You said to the guy about the union, more people voting for the protocol than against. He refuses to acknowledge it. You said to the woman, should she have voted for Theresa May's deal? Let's not talk about that. You had John Redwood on there talking about it's the EU, they're belligerent. What is the matter with the people? They're running the country in the middle of this big crisis and they can't even tell the truth. We're listening to the radio and we're thinking, is this the kind of people that's representing us? Facts are put in front of you, mister, and you're still saying, I don't see it that way. Well, you need to get out of politics because real is real. What's the matter with you?
So can we boil down your question to why don't politicians admit that they've made a mistake? Because if you think about it, when politicians do admit they've made a mistake, they very rarely suffer a backlash for it. I accept Nick Clegg from that over student fees. I'm not sure that did him any good. But generally, if you say, yeah, I got it wrong, most people have a bit of forgiveness, don't they, Christine?
No, I agree with you.
So why won't you admit you got it wrong then?
But
on
I would
Brexit?
have to believe that I got it wrong to say that. And if I believed that I got it wrong, I would say so.
Give me an example of one thing where you think, yeah, I did get that wrong.
Oh, how long have you got? I can't
Joining
think
the Liberal Democrats?
No, that was a very wise move. Have I got it wrong? Yeah. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, not because there aren't any, but just because I hadn't been thinking about that. But
you
yes,
have to think about it while I go to the other
can admit that there have been times when I've got things wrong, but I'll think about it.
Sarah, you're not a politician, but can you think of something where you think, yeah, I did get that really wrong?
Well, I think with civilian life, you get fired, and so you know when you've done something wrong. But I do think for politicians, apologies are very graceful and also will help you on actually the Partygate business. If
why is it?
Someone had just said at the beginning,
you know a lot of politicians. I mean, going back to Lloyd's question, why don't they admit that they get things wrong enough?
I don't know if it's partly the kind of people who go into politics, or it's something to do with public discourse that it doesn't allow them to. I think that may be part
sign
of it.
Of weakness.
It seems like weakness when actually it's human.
Florence,
whenever I made a mistake, very active constituency that I'm proud to represent, and we had a meeting a few weeks ago on the climate emergency, and I stood in the church hall in Kennington and I went on stage and I said to the audience that I'm going to be honest with you, this is an area that I'm not up to date with. And I admitted that.
Yeah.
And
did you get booed?
I didn't get booed. We actually had a really good conversation because there were loads of people who were far more knowledgeable than me in the audience and who were able to educate me. So I held up my hands and said, this is an area that is my weak point and I need to learn.
It's funny because people are very reluctant to say, I don't know. And of course, if you say it on a programme like this, it kind of defeats the object of the programme, doesn't it? I remember watching Question Time once, and one of the panellists, who was a Liberal Democrat, I have to say, said for 2 questions, said, I don't know. And I thought, well, you'll never be invited back. It wasn't Christine, by the way. Matt, you should get out of politics, according to Lloyd.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, that's an interesting perspective. I think a mistake I've made, I've been trying to think of mistakes. I think I make too many of them to actually to quantify that. The biggest mistake I've made since getting this job actually was joining Twitter. I argued about it for about 2 months with the people around me that don't want to join that horrible, nasty platform. And I probably learned afterwards it wasn't a bad approach, but I haven't come off it yet, so we'll see.
Right. Lloyd, do you want to have another go?
Yeah, I just was amazed that the guy did not go back to what you asked him. You put the facts in front of him about the voting, the percentage, and he just ignored it. Just ignored it. No, he's being like the DUP. He's just going to ignore them.
Okay, Lloyd. Thank you very much indeed. Final text from Charlotte in Newcastle. Matt Vickers successfully lobbied to get the Teesside Parmo added to the menu at the Commons canteen. If you could add anything to the menu, what would it be? And Matt, what is a Teesside Parmo? And is it your greatest achievement in politics?
Well, Teesside Parmo is fantastic regional delicacy. You know when you're on the way home from the pub and you go to the pizza shop, you might get a pizza or a kebab. I think Parmo started off like that, but now if you come to a restaurant in Teesside, you can get the Parmo. Beautiful thing. We managed to get it on the menu in Parliament.
What's it made of?
It's chicken, bechamel sauce and cheese. It's like, there's quite a few calories in there.
And all for 30p.
I'll challenge Lee to cook me up one for 30p.
Okay, so what would the rest of you like to add to the Commons menu? Christine?
I'm going to be a typical Scot here. One of the things I love is haggis, neeps and tatties. Now, we do have it once a year, but I would like to have it more often because there's just something about that. The problem is it has to have a whiskey sauce with it to really get the benefit of the haggis, pour it over it. But I think we could cope with that.
I'm already feeling a bit ill. Florence?
It would have to be my favourite jollof rice. But I will be honest with you, Ian, Nigerian jollof rice. We have a friendly, ongoing battle with our Ghanaian neighbours in terms of who has the best jollof rice. So Nigerian jollof rice and some moi moi.
Moi moi, what's that?
Which is like a bean rice pudding cake.
No, don't like that either. Sarah?
This is for sort of feel-good boosting British food. I do think English sparkling wine, lots of it, and Norfolk cheese I would put on them.
Norfolk cheese? I live in Norfolk and I've never eaten Norfolk cheese. Is it a bit smelly or?
It's because it's from Norfolk. No,
I didn't mean that. Oh my God.
It's no Wensleydale.
Normal for Norfolk. Right, thank you all very much indeed. Matt Vickers, Florence Eshalomi, Sarah Sands and Christine Jardine. We will be back after the news. And what are we talking about after the news? I've completely forgotten. We're talking about warring neighbours because we're all going to be allowed to vote on planning permission that our neighbours put in. I mean, what could possibly go wrong with that? I want your stories of your neighbours from hell. It's 9:03.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock. The government says more will be done to help with the cost of living crisis, but there won't be an emergency budget. The Prime Minister